everyone. My today's lecture will be on feudalism in China. It is generally believed that feudalism existed in China for more than 2000 years. It started from the ancient time and continued till 1949 with the Chinese Revolution. Actually, feudalism has posed a serious academic challenge and scholarship in Chinese studies. Chinese historians do not necessarily agree that feudalism is an appropriate category to analyze the study of China's past and its significance. Over the last half a century, feudalism has been one of the conceptual staples of historical work since with Marxist historiography, which has rendered feudalism as an unquestionable characteristic of Chinese history. Most historians agree on locating feudalism in the early Zhou Dynasty. There is some consensus among Marxist historians and non-Marxist historians alike that feudalism originated in the early Zhou and represents the classic age of feudalism in China. What distinguishes the two different historiography in Chinese study is that the evaluation of Chinese society after the early Zhou. Chinese nationalist historians believe that it ended with the establishment of the king rule and the end of the early Zhou dynasty, whereas Marxist and most predominantly traditional Marxists believe that it continued right after the advent of modern China till 1949. Derk Bodde believes that the modern Chinese equivalent for feudalism is a compound term. It is generally called as feng-chien chih-tu, which literally means feng-establishment system. Though this term became really popular in China only with the comparatively recent times following the influx of sociological and historical concepts from the West, the term feng, with its key component, has a history of more than 3 millennia and carries with it a rich body of association stemming from indigenous ancient Chinese civilization. As used in the literature of the Zhou period, feng means, among other things, a mound, or to raise a mound, or to earth up a plant, a boundary, or to determine one's fief. In ancient written graph represents a hand beside a plant growing from the soil, and apparently is indebted to portray the act of heaping earth around a plant, or more generally to raise a mound. As with most vocabulary of social and political discourse in 20th century China, the Chinese term for feudalism is feng-chien, was borrowed in the early part of this century from the Japanese, where it was first used in the modern or the Western sense of the term. Feng-chien, however, was an ancient concept in Chinese political thought going back to its origin in the Zhou dynasty from 1122 to 256 BCE. What historians do agree upon is that feng-establishment refers to something akin to a ritual of enfeoffment, or the establishment of a fief that prevailed during the early Zhou dynasty, when the Zhou kings formally granted lands and labor to their subordinates, creating a landed nobility with whom they shared administration of the Zhou territories. Historian Tao Zheng puts it, China was home to many feudal nobles before the spring and autumn period, but feudalism had not really existed in China before the Zhou period. At the time, regional officials served as clan officers, but many of them had titles like lords, or the title was probably a mere assumption made by later generations. In a unified China ruled by the Zhou Dynasty, the kings conferred upon their sons and brothers as well as those who helped found the kingdom. According to Li Dongzhao, feudalism in ancient China is about enfeoffment, and as a system, it existed only in the Zhou dynasty. It is a pyramid-shaped system based on fiefdom and stipends tied to the ranks of nobility of dukes, marquis, count, viscount, and baron, as described in Mencius's writings, with each rank of the titles being accompanied by a size of varying lands. Such a system, however, was replaced by the prefecture county system after the first emperor unified China in 221 BCE. Feudalism caused to be a major polity after that. In ancient China, feudalism was regarded as a political polity. The feudal system and the prefecture county system were two opposing ideas about how to rule the country. Scholars and officials debated the advantages and disadvantages of each, frequently for a long time, but the major focus remained on the power and distribution between the central government and the local government. By the time the Ming dynasty was dying and the Qing was taking over, feudal theory experienced a very important change. The fief system used during the Zhou period was now used as a way of criticizing and limiting the power of the imperial government. As Gu Yanwu, the Neo-Confucian philosopher, pointed out that the feudal system was the law of the land during the time of ancient sage kings. While the shortcoming of the feudal system was that the power was too dispersed, the prefecture county system, on the other hand, gave too much power to the central government. In order to rule the country in good order, Gu Huofen felt that feudal idea should be incorporated into the county prefecture system. He even proposed three solutions: that local officials share power with the emperor and take care of their own business, opposition to the avoidance system for officials in office, and that gentry, ethnical group leaders, and other local authorities help the county and magistrate run local officials. His thesis reappeared again during the Qing rule in other different forms. The Zhou dynasty came to power after the Shang dynasty. By the 11th century BCE, they conquered considerable areas which had probably lain outside the Shang domain of power. Then, because of the difficulties involved in maintaining personal rule over such a vast empire and new territories, the Zhou conquerors retired to their homelands in the west, where they thereafter exercised only direct control over a limited area which came to be known as the royal domain. Of the newly acquired eastern territories, a part was parceled out to various Zhou leaders and allies who helped them in conquering these new territories. But much was apparently simply left in the continued possession of the indigenous clan leaders who during the Zhou advance had either been conquered or had voluntarily submitted themselves to the Zhou kings. Even the descendants of the house of the Shang, in fact, were not exterminated but were allowed to continue ruling over their state, though of a limited size. In this way, there came to be a host of small states or principalities. As many as 100 such existed in the 8th century BCE. During the early Zhou dynasty, Most of these were separated from one another by mountains, marshes, and other uncultivable or no man's land, people only by barbarians over whom no one exercised clear-cut jurisdiction. The relationship of the rulers of these principalities to the Zhou monarchy, as well as their own landowning subordinates, seems in a general way to merit the term feudal, and it is usually applied to mean feudalism in the known use of the term. But the evolutionary process of Zhou feudalism was very slow and took almost 2 centuries to develop. Within the separate states themselves, however, feudal institutions persisted until the end of the dynasty, though to varying degrees according to time and place. Beginning about the 6th century BCE, the impact of a series of social, political, and economic changes forced a gradual transformation and eventual breakdown of the old feudal order, particularly in Qin, where it is quite probable that feudalism had already virtually disappeared prior to the creation of the Qin Empire. Now, how did the Zhou system operated? The Zhou rulers, like their Shan predecessors, held the title of Wang or King. Their vassals were collectively known as Chu Hao or all the lords or all the princes. The territories with which these nobles were invested were known as kuo, a word which today literally means a county or a principality. Rulership of such kuo was hereditary, descent being generally by primogeniture, though favoritism or intrigue produced many violations to this principle. Smaller fiefs also existed, known as fu yung or attached territories, the rulers of which had no direct access to the Zhou kings, but rendered their services to the ruler to that particular neighboring kuo to which they happened to be attached. The nobles were confirmed in their possession of their territory through a ceremony of investiture that generally took place in the Zhou ancestral temple. There, the new vassal, after receiving from the king a solemn admonition to be conscientious in his duties, prostrated himself before him and was given a jade scepter and a written tablet bearing the terms of his enfeoffment. Often these were accompanied by other valuable gifts like bronze vessels, clothing items, weapons, chariots, and the like. In return for their land holdings, the nobles manifested allegiance by going to the Zhou courts for individual audiences with the king or sent envoys for this purpose. In time of rebellion or barbarian attack, they were expected to provide troops to the king. Sometimes they were called upon special services such as supplying of men and materials for repairing the city wall of the royal capital. The king had the right, if not always the power, to act as judge in disputes involving 2 or more nobles, or to send troops against those who proved recalcitrant. Within their own states, however, the nobles were for all practical purposes autonomous. They appointed their own officials, levied own taxes, maintained their own armies, and exercised their own justice, which was based on tradition and personal opinion rather than on clearly defined body of law. Much of their land, nonetheless, was further subdivided in the form of domains known as yi, which they distributed to their relatives, officials, and courtiers. Such yi were measured by the number of peasant families occupying them. A common distinction in Zhou literature for members of the upper class is chunzu or ruler's sons. Originally, this term primarily indicated good birth, but later Due to Confucian influence, it acquired a strong moral coloration in a manner very similar to the English word gentleman. Lowest among the Chunzu was the class known as the Shi, which means a young man or a stalwart. All these aristocrats, regardless of whether they bore or did not bore any titles of nobility, they differed from the rest of the population in that they maintained family genealogies, performed no agricultural labor or artisanal labor, did not engage in trade, and lived according to an elaborate but unwritten code of ceremonial and etiquette known as Li, which included rites, ceremonies, traditional mores, customary moralities. These Li, which took the place of any fixed code of law, were designed to cover all major activities of a lifetime and required much time to learn. Warfare was waged more for prestige than for gain or taking of territory. When not engaged in warfare, the Chinese aristocrats, like their medieval European counterparts, amused themselves by feasting, hunting, and engaging in games such as archery contests, etc. To a great extent than in medieval Europe, however, they seem to have been seriously interested in administrative affairs of peace. The economic basis of this feudal structure was the great bulk of non-aristocratic commoners known as min, or the people, or shuzhen or chungzhen, that is the masses. Unlike the aristocracy, the min had no family names or genealogies, no ancestral cult, and but little knowledge of the complex rules of the Li. This non-aristocratic population belonged to various categories. Some were artisanals or menials who served the ruling group. Some included slaves consisting either of war captives or persons who have been enslaved for crimes, however, but the slave category appeared to have been numerically small. There also were merchants, few of whom seem to have succeeded in acquiring a fair amount of wealth. Far more vital in the total economy was the great mass of the peasantry. They appear to have no formal rights over the land they cultivated, to which they were bound as serfs, and which they could be transferred whenever its control passed from one overlord to another. There seems to have been no trace of free landholders as in Europe. It is uncertain whether the serfdom of the peasantry derived from the formally recognized right of the landlord over the lives of those who cultivated his land, or simply from the fact that any peasant desperate enough to flee from his own overlord would have great trouble in obtaining land from another. The peasants were obligated in peacetime to surrender a portion of their crops to their overlord, generally 1/10 of it, though probably the amount differed according to situation, and they were subjected to conscription for wall and road building, irrigation and flood control works, and other public construction. In the time of war, they supplied the foot soldiers who accompanied the nobles in their chariots. The latter centuries of the Zhou was marked by widespread change and innovation, which speeded the dissolution of the feudal order, though remnants persisted within the individual states shut down due to the Qin unification in 221 BCE. Let us now pause for a quiz. The question is, there is a widespread consensus among historians that feudalism evolved during the number 1 option, Shang period, 2, Zhou period, 3, Qin period, or 4, Han period. The answer is option 2, Zhou period. Bai Shaoyi, the historian, however, believes that feudal society reached maturity in China during the Qin and Han dynasties. The Qin dynasty is the first feudal empire in China which unified the country in a scale unknown in China since the Shang and the Zhou dynasties, and established a form of government which had a lasting influence on Chinese feudalism. Among the accomplishments of the Qin dynasty was the construction of the Great Wall of China. In power, they were only for 15 years, from 221 BCE to 207 BCE, though through the reigns of two emperors. The Qin dynasty gave way to 4 years of Chu-Han conflict before the Han dynasty was established, which ruled China for 400 years. King Yanzheng of China decided to give himself a more distinguished title, the first emperor or Shi Huangdi, and decreed that his successors be titled the second emperor, the third emperor, and so on. He hoped that the Qin empire would be passed on to this way forever through his descendants. The Hans, who succeeded the Qin during its first 60 years, took two major steps to consolidate the feudal regime. The first step was taken in the economic field, aimed to alleviate class contradiction and to ensure revenue for the imperial treasury so as to strengthen the foundation of the empire. The second step was to eliminate the menace which the fiefdom presented to the imperial court. It was during the Han rule that Confucianism gained supremacy as the ideological weapon of the feudal dynasties. The Qin-Han period was one in which feudal relations reached maturity in China. The emperor, the supreme landowner, embodied a unity of land ownership and political power. Next to the emperor were the landed aristocrats with hereditary titles. Each of them had a fief embracing a great number of households. The powerful landlords had a deep-rooted local influence but enjoyed no political prestige. The mercantile landlords, otherwise called rich people, had much influence but were discriminated against politically. The growth of feudal relations in this period brought closer in economic life people scattered over wide areas who spoke more or less the same language and enhanced their national consciousness. It was in this context that Han nationalism came into existence. What happened was that during the other period, we will see gradually in the Ming King period, there was a marked decline in the feudal culture. During this period, the social economy continued to develop. The nature of labor power underwent a considerable change, and the feudal relations of production imposed shackles on production development. Sprouts of capitalism slowly developed in certain areas and in certain industries. It could not grow normally, however, since it could not free itself from the predominant feudal influence. The development of agriculture during the Ming King period centered on the production of paddy, rice, and of cash crops, as well as the development of a new varieties of crop. Bai Shaoyi writes, though nascent capitalism made its appearance during the late Ming and early Qing period, it never had a chance to grow normally for several centuries. The reason was very, very complex. Firstly, there was this inertia of a self-sufficient economy that had prevailed in feudal China for a very long period. The basic unit of this self-sufficient economy or natural economy was the family, where men tilled and women woved. And there were no need for marketable goods to satisfy the daily demand. An average peasant had no way of improving his livelihood, and he was exploited and oppressed by his government and his landlord. whenever production increased, the benefit of such an increase would first go to the landlord, and the peasant received little or nothing. Peasant uprisings struck hard at the landlord, but basically they did not change the economic well-being of the peasants. After a major uprising, certain changes occurred as far as the peasant's status was concerned, yet they must return to the land and re-establish the traditional household where men tilled and women woved. This structure of natural economy, namely the traditional household centered around the family, limited the expansion of the commercial market and prevented industrial capitalism from opening up its avenue for operation. Secondly, the guilds of the handicraftsmen limited capitalist development. Thirdly, the oppression of the commerce and handicraft industry by the feudal government also prevented a capitalist form of production from developing. Fourthly, the handicraftsmen and merchants operating under risky conditions could not compete with landowners and moneylenders in terms of the safety of investment as well as the size of financial returns. Fifthly, both the king and the Ming government imposed strict limitations on foreign trade. Sometimes they went as far as forbidding merchants to go out to sea. This self-defeating policy of preventing one's own goods from being sold abroad did not help the development of commodity production. In conclusion, it can be said that the main reason why capitalism could not develop normally in China was the strong and stubborn resistance on the part of the feudal influence which capitalism in its initial stage of development could not overcome. The feudal production relationship of the Ming king government not only failed to develop the help in the development of productive forces, but also were able to counteract any other alternative development as well. In other words, the feudal system, aging and corrupt though it was still very, very strong and strong enough to prevent the emergence of a new social system. This, one might say, was one of the most important characteristics of the declining stage of Chinese feudalism. The group that had the largest landholdings and the greatest influence on society during the King Ming period was a group known as the official gentry. As a result of the often repeated peasant war of the Song and the Ming dynasties, the degree-holding bureaucrat landlords with office ranks were by large overthrown, and the official gentry took their place. Among the official gentry were the bureaucrats with official ranks, but they were a separate class official, the gentry of the Ming King period, who differed from bureaucratic landlords of the earlier dynasties in many respects. Their constituents were much wider in scope than the bureaucrats. They included incumbent officials, retired officials, and prospective officials, the last mentioned being those who had already passed the civil service examinations but had not been awarded with any official posts. The word gentry was applicable only to the last groups, that is, a man might be an incumbent official in one place, but he remained member of the gentry in his own hometown. While the official gentry as a class were lower in political standards when compared to the bureaucrats with official ranks, their capacity of doing evil, such as exploitation of others and corruption, increased nevertheless. Now let us see a quiz. The feudal ideology was enforced in the Han period through option 1, patriarchy, option 2, Confucianism, option 3, scholar gentry, or option 4, all of the above. The answer is option 4, all of the above. Now I'm coming to the concluding part, which is a summing up of what we have done till now. In conclusion, one may say that feudalism came into shape incrementally rather than abruptly in China. It was established as a result of sweeping changes at all levels, economic, political, and social. Anything short of that would have meant a mere inception of feudalism instead of its entrenchment. The Zhou Dynasty marked the official arrival of feudalism in China. Economically speaking, the agricultural economy reached its peak during the Zhou Dynasty. Relationships tied to land were the pillar of all social organization. The patriarchal system was designed to sustain the feudal ideology. The family was the core of this feudal structure. The head of the family was the man or the patriarch. His sons would be placed under him, and women in the family had no position as other. The sons were answerable to the father and were obliged to him, and pledged unanswered loyalty to him. This same structure was represented in the official system and in the political system. As in the family, every member was under the patriarch. Similarly, in the whole of the political system, everyone was subservient to the emperor, who was like the family figure or the fatherhead. Only Zongyi, or the eldest son of the first wife, was able to succeed to the throne to maintain territorial integrity and to complete the administrative power of the fief owners and rulers. Only when there was no eldest son of a first wife could younger sons or sons of concubines rise to power. Gradually, feudalism started declining under the Ming-Qing rule, especially after the war with the foreigners and eventually with the rise of nationalism, which culminated firstly in the 1911 war independence movement and later in 1949 with the establishment of the PRC or the People's Republic of China. Thank you.